All right, so let me tap the screen right there so you can see the title of this particular video. Again, another one by Marques Brownlee. He probably is the king of tech YouTube. M2 MacBook Pro, why does this exist? And that's a good question, and I feel the consensus amongst most reviewers is, yeah, we're not really sure why this computer is even here. So just to give a recap, you have for sale right now on Apple's, but well, I'll say listed because everything isn't available yet, but you have the $1,000 M1 MacBook Air. Then you have what will be the $1,200 M2 MacBook Air. Then you have the $1,300 M2 MacBook Pro. And then, yes, you do make a jump from that up to, I believe, $1,999, or let's just say $2,000 for the 14-inch M1 Pro, or M1, I think it's the M1 Pro MacBook Pro. And just looking at it, you say, okay, well, that's a pretty sizable jump between the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro and the 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro. What's that, $700? Yeah, it is. But I believe the 14-incher starts at $2,000, but with that, you get 16 gigabytes of RAM, and I believe your internal storage is automatically upgraded to 512 gigabytes of storage. So right then and there, that will be a $400 increase in price if we're talking about anything that's cheaper than that. So now we're looking at, if we're trying to compare apples to apples, at that point, really just a $300 difference. But with that $300 difference, you get a bigger and better screen. You get MagSafe. You get ports. You get an updated keyboard. You get a faster, more powerful chip. You get probably a bigger battery. And at that point, it's like, well, this sounds like a really compelling machine. And the price difference, honestly, at that point, isn't as controversial as some might say. And I wouldn't even say it's controversial, but it really is something that makes you think, do I need $2,000 worth of computer, or can I stick with this $1,300? But then I would ask, okay, well, what's so special about that $1,300 machine? Because you have the M1 MacBook Air starting at $300 less than that, which is still quite a capable machine. And then since the M2 MacBook Air hasn't been released, we are going to make some assumptions that it's going to be pretty good. And based off of whatever benchmarks you might find out there by the MacBook Pro, the new M2 MacBook Pro, 13-inch, you can extrapolate that the M2 MacBook Air might perform slightly worse. But again, that's slightly worse, and you're still going to be dealing with a phenomenal machine. So we're looking at pricing there, and it's, well, why pay the $1,300 if you know you don't need that $2,000 machine? You don't need anything super professional. There's no reason to go that far. Okay, so then it sounds like you're more of a consumer grade user. Why not just go ahead and get the $1,200 MacBook Air, or get the $1,000 M1 MacBook Air? So everybody who's had an opportunity to play around with this thing online, I haven't. I'm not, going to buy that thing, nor do I have opportunity to get a review unit. But it just seems like Apple said, hey, we have this M1 MacBook Pro 13-inch chassis, design, everything. We probably didn't sell as many as we wanted to avoid any R&D cost. We're also in the middle of a chip shortage, and maybe there's some supply chain issues. Why not just reuse what we currently have? And when I say reuse, I'm not saying let's just go and take some M1 chips off of some M1 chips off of some motherboards and plop on an M2. But it wouldn't surprise me if they did do that. I was watching the YouTube channel Mac Address. No, it wasn't Mac Address. I believe it was Short Circuit. But the host of Mac Address was kind of a guest on that particular episode. And he was shocked, and I was too, that apparently the M1 13-inch MacBook Pro and the M2 13-inch MacBook Pro have the exact same model number. So if that is true, if that is the case, this is literally the same computer. They just took one chip out and put another one in. Also, there have been some issues with regards to SSD speeds. Apparently, with the 256 gig versions of the M1 13-inch MacBook Pro, you had two NAND chips, so two 128 NAND chips. Now you have one 256, and apparently that's affected performance. From those who've done the benchmarking, the SSD, I believe it was the read or write speeds. Both are slower, but one was substantially slower than the performance of its predecessor, which was the M1 13-inch MacBook Pro. So it does just seem like it's a machine that Apple just said, hey, we'll sell it. Some people will buy it, some people won't, but we have things that we can sell, so we are going to sell them. Apple also happened to mention that the MacBook Pro is the second best selling laptop. I don't know if they said in the country or the world, but even when they made that claim, you're like, well, I mean, what's backing that up? And yeah, and I'll just leave it at that. I don't know where they got it from, and I don't know how they actually calculate that the MacBook Air is the number one best selling laptop and the MacBook Pro is the second best selling laptop. So I don't know. Is that over the course of the last decade, the last month, one particular day last year? I mean, it can be a true statement, but if you look at the window of time that they might be referring to, you might then question, all right, how valid is that statement? But anyway, I've been trying to watch these videos and record at the same time while I'm watching them for the first time, as opposed to watching through them, develop a bunch of thoughts and opinions, or maybe write some stuff down and come back. And for some videos, I probably will. But this particular one, I started and then I stopped about maybe a minute, if that, in, because Marquez said something and I wanted to address it in a way that I said, okay, I want to address this, boom, right here. And then I will, yes, now be surprised with the other things that he says. Because I honestly kind of wanted to respond to what he said without any of his rebuttals or anything that might influence my thought process of what I say when I'm responding to what he says. So essentially, this is a video of me talking to myself about Marquez talking to himself. I should probably get some more friends.
All right, so this is the new 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro, and I don't think anyone should actually buy it. Wait, what? Yeah, no, I think it's a great computer, first of all, don't get me wrong, but with the introduction of the M2 MacBook Air and the existence of the 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro, they've managed to squeeze any reason for this machine to exist at this price to basically zero. Nobody should buy it. Yeah, but nobody? That seems pretty harsh. Matter of fact, I'm here. Let me challenge you on that. This is a great computer. Changed my mind. Okay.
And see, I know he's just talking to himself, and I know it's just a video, but one, just outside of tech, people, kind of have that perception. Oh, you need to change my mind. Like, no, I don't. I'll state some facts, and if you agree with them, great. If not, oh well. But what the Marquez on the right side said was, it's a good computer. So you guys are already on the same page, and there's really not much more for him to say with regards to that specific statement that the Marquez on the left said. So it is a good computer. Nobody's doubting that. But so is the MacBook Air, which is cheaper. You have two versions of the MacBook Air, which will still be for sale on Apple's website, which are both cheaper. The question at that point is, and I hope the one on the right says, well, based off of all the information we have on the current M1 MacBook Air and the up and coming M2 MacBook Air, you tell me why this 13-inch MacBook Pro is a good purchase when you have those other options on the bottom. And if you think you need something more powerful, you have options on the higher end. The touch bar is not a good reason. I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there who like the touch bar. And then maybe having a slightly larger battery, but still in the 13-inch body might be a reason for somebody. But yeah, I think even how he's approaching his self in his own video is already skewed, because the one Marquez on the right already said, it's a good computer. Don't get me wrong. Literally said that. And then the one on the right said, the one on the left said, this is a good computer. Changed my mind. It's like, no, I'm not trying to change your mind that it's a good computer. It is. but I still don't think people should buy it. And we'll see how it goes, because that's where I stopped before, because I was like, ooh, this is going to be interesting. But let's continue.
Well, let's just start with the design. So Apple's been going through their laptop lineup, upgrading everything with this new square shape, larger displays with thinner bezels, getting rid of the touch bar, and actually adding ports. But this particular refresh didn't get any of that. So this brand new laptop looks exactly the same as the M1 MacBook Pro from 2 years ago, which...
And even with that statement, some people don't care. I wouldn't say that the new design per se is the best, is a good reason to not buy it. And I say this is the old design. The other machines have a newer design. So yes, the M2 MacBook Air is going to look similar to the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. Cool. But that for me wouldn't be enough. I mean, yeah, it wouldn't be enough. Now, granted, the screen on the more expensive MacBook Pros is better. Like, they are just better displays. So that is something, hey, design-wise, technologically, those are improvements. This is just stagnating with something that's been like that for quite a while. But so, definitely taking that into consideration. The port selection, yes, is important for some people, but others are okay with the two Thunderbolt 3 USB 4 ports, because maybe they don't need to plug a lot of stuff in. So again, like, I feel like I am in support of this machine, but at that price point and with the other options that are available, it just doesn't make sense for me, and apparently for many other people, to buy it. So design wise, yeah, it's old. Performance wise, it's probably going to be okay. In fact, I think people have done benchmarks, and it is okay. But again, as I said before, it's not the Marquez on the right. It's not his job to disprove that it's a good computer. It is. It's just there are other good computers surrounding it that are probably better buys.
Looks exactly the same as the 13-inch Intel MacBook Pro with a touch bar that dropped in 2016, because it is exactly the same. I could give him sustainability credit, I guess, for recycling an old design and apparently using the same boxes from the M1 MacBook Pro, just with new stickers on them. But yeah, this exact shell design is literally 6 years old and is starting to look kind of out of place now next to Apple's other notebooks. Like, can you imagine any other company trying to reuse a 6-year-old design? Like, you try to tell me
I mean, like, how... I mean, he's right about that. He really is. But, okay, you're saying a 6-year-old design is a problem, but was a 5-year-old problem not a design? Like, a 5-year-old design not a problem? I mean, the only reason that the design is an issue is because Apple changed some of their products in the MacBook line. But if we had gotten this exact same model, or this exact same layout for the M2 MacBook Air, or last year for the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, if they looked exactly like this, we wouldn't really care. So is 5 years was okay, but 6 years isn't? I mean, I feel like we are kind of reaching when it comes to the design of the machine. I agree that, yes, it does look old. I agree that more ports is better. I agree that for some people, MagSafe is a substantial upgrade, because now it frees up your actual ports when you're charging. But at the same time, I'm going to let him continue, because I just feel, all right, yeah, the design is old. Okay, cool. The design's old, but that alone, which of course isn't the only reason. We got more time for him to say other stuff, but that itself is just like, all right, cool. And as I'm looking at my iPhone, this, as far as I'm concerned, is the exact same thing as the iPhone 10, which came out. So, I mean, let's just count the iPhone. So you have the 10, the 10S, the 11s, and the 12s. And the 13s are out now. So that's 5 years of roughly the same design. I mean, the notch got a little smaller. The phone got a little square instead of having the rounded sides. But is anybody complaining that an iPhone is an iPhone? I mean, some people do, yes. But if we're holding this MacBook to the same standard, if the iPhone 13 and I think the iPhone 14, some of them are going to look different, but I think I think the pros are going to look different, but the regulars are going to look just like this. At that point, is that design language too old too? So yeah, I feel like we definitely pick and choose when it comes to the things that we want to complain about when it suits a point that we may be trying to make or something that we're trying to disprove. But as far as I'm concerned, yes, it looks old. But if all the MacBooks still look like this, I'd be like, well, it's just another MacBook. Still looks old, still has pretty thick bezels or whatever. But they all look like that, so it is what it is.
2016 Asus laptop re-release would fly today, like a 6-year-old XPS drop. Like, that's wild. Yeah, but this isn't that. Like, let me tell you, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm not just saying that. Like, this is
I mean, I think that's just something stupid to say, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, clearly Apple fixed it by changing the other models, but for some reason decided to leave this one. And of course, well, they'll never openly say why they did it, but yeah, it's for cost cutting measures. It was easier to just reuse what they have. And I agree. Well, don't if for a lot of things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But as technology progresses and as we move on, we don't want the same design language as a 2010 MacBook Pro or whatever. So things need to move on. And depending on how things are in the world, maybe next year's 13-inch MacBook Pro will look different, or if they release it again in 2 years or whatever their release schedule is. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't say in this situation, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
a really good laptop design. All metal jacket, A+ hinge. And let me just remind you, you reviewed it and you loved it. The screen was bright and high resolution, still is. The speakers were best in class, still are. Great trackpad and keyboard. And by the way, some people do really like the touch bar. You said so yourself. It might not do a whole lot, but it still has its few advantages. Okay, but that is in a vacuum. Like, that's the thing. By itself, I would agree with you. This
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to cut him off. By itself, everything he said was fine, but he talked about the keyboard. Well, on the new machines, the keyboard is updated and presumably better. He talked about the speakers. On the new machines, presumably the speakers are louder or better, however you want to quantify them. I talked about the screen. On the 14 and 16 inch, the screens are better. So definitely a lot of things that the 13-inch MacBook Pro has done and is good at, but as Apple themselves as a company has moved on, um, so should this machine. This machine should have upgraded the same way as the other ones.
computer is a perfectly good laptop. Buy it. But as soon as you put it alongside the new MacBook Air, which is basically the same price, it's actually worse at basically everything. Like, I got hands-on time with the new M2 MacBook Air that's about to come out next month, right? The Air has a larger display with thinner bezels, and in that notch, there's a new 1080p webcam instead of a 6-year-old 720p webcam. It has MagSafe with a color-matching cable, which enables fast charging and essentially frees up an extra port, since that's one more USB-C port that you're not plugged into. And it's all in a package that's thinner, weighs less, and is basically the same price. So why would you buy this MacBook Pro? How is it even Pro anymore? You know what? That's a good question. Why would you buy?
And I would say, how was it ever Pro? Like, words mean things, and companies will just slap anything on anything. I'm not going to go back to the Intel days because I just am not going to do that. But even pre 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, we have the M1 MacBook Air and the M1 MacBook Pro. Okay. Now, what are the differences? You have a touch bar. You have a bigger battery. You have a fan. And I don't know if there's really much, if there's anything else that's different. I'm sure there might be. But if we're calling that a Pro for those mundane changes, which really it's just, well, the fan and the battery are bigger. I mean, should we somehow slap a Pro title on the M1 Mac Mini that essentially was a MacBook Pro just without like a screen or, a keyboard or a touchpad? But it's what made it professional to begin with. With the 14 and 16-inch ones, I could at least get on board with that. Now, granted, this is an opinion of time, because before the 14 and 16-inch ones existed, I probably would have been like, yeah, cool, it has those things that I just mentioned. But now that these other machines, these other better machines do exist, how exactly, definitively saying, how exactly is this a professional machine? And now we should really ask, was it ever a professional grade machine? And I'd arguably say no, because professionals probably had MacBook Pros, but then they had an iMac Pro or a Mac Pro if they're, in the Apple ecosystem, which still are all kind of consumer grade devices. I mean, they're really impressive. I'm taking nothing from them, but just by slapping that Pro moniker on it, just seems to do the word itself a disservice.
This Pro, the answer, I think, first of all, is it is the cheapest Pro in the lineup. Technically, it's true. But really, the reason you'd get this over the Air is the thicker chassis supports active cooling. So it's got a fan and all the benefits.
And you know what? It wouldn't even surprise me I know how he did this video. He shot himself once and then, just looking over as if there's somebody there. Then he kept the camera there and shot himself a second time. It almost looks like he tried to do something with the lighting, maybe. In fact, he did. That way there was kind of a hard line. So the lighting textures were probably different on purpose. But who knows? Maybe he's actually holding M1 MacBook Pros because we can't even tell the difference. But yeah, I just thought about that as I was listening.
Benefits that come with that. I mean, the benchmarks are in, and to the surprise of absolutely no one, it's pretty clear that this M2 chip is awesome. It's living up to the 10 to 20% better multi-core CPU performance, and even more impressively, the 2 extra GPU cores over M1 is giving it 30 to 40% better GPU performance, which is basically the only area where you could say M1 was lacking. So this is awesome for any applications that lean on the GPU. Everything's faster, Final Cut is faster, Premiere is faster, any games you might play are all faster. And the cherry on top is it has a dramatically improved media engine, same one from the higher end chips actually. So you can actually pull off some heavier Final Cut Pro edits. So for something like that, where you're in a program for hours and things are getting hot, okay, that's when you'd need the fans to kick in, keep performance high, longer than the MacBook Air ever could, no throttling. So if you've got the sustained workloads and the long performance stuff, you should.
And I would be careful with the whole no throttling. I feel like I saw some other YouTuber who ran the benchmarks and did a bunch of other stuff saying no throttling. So saying that there was some throttling. So the examples he's given, cool. But as far as I'm concerned, and I kind of used to feel uncomfortable saying it, but if you're buying any Apple product, you saying I can't afford like the next thing up shouldn't be really something you say. That's just my opinion, but none of these products are cheap. So if you're saying, well, I'm going to buy an Apple whatever, it's like, well, you could probably shell out a few more dollars to get the next upgraded thing if you're considering it. Now, in this situation, you might not right now be considering that 14-inch one compared to this 13-inch one, but for the money that you spend and what you get for that additional money spent, it is well worth it. And again, if you're buying Apple products, they're all expensive. So spend a little more money, however these freaking payment plans work, and get the 14-inch one. Or if you realize you don't even need that much performance, even though the chip itself is incredible, scale down to the M2 MacBook Air or even the M1 MacBook Air.
Get the M2 MacBook Pro. No. Those people should just go straight to the 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro. Just go straight to the big brother. Look, if you know you're going to be doing workloads and things that the MacBook Air can't handle, then you should just go to the actually pro laptop, the upgraded machine. If you're going to get a nice laptop and you want to do extra performance stuff on it, you weren't going to get the baseline MacBook Pro, right? You were going to bump it up, first of all, because you want at least 16 gigs of memory, right? And second of all, because the 256 gigs of baseline Pro storage is kind of insulting, and that version has particularly clipped SSD performance.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, if I didn't say it that way, but I was just looking at, well, what you get for the additional money. So yeah, bumping it up to 16 gigs of RAM and then bumping your storage up to 512 gigabytes of storage instead of 256. That's already a $400 upgrade right there. So now we're talking $1,700 compared to $2,000. And at that point, it's like for that additional $300, which you're already spending $1,700. Just get the better machine. like that. That's really the end of the conversation right there. Just get the better machine for the additional $300 that you'll be spending.
Worse than even the M1 MacBook Pro. So to get to 1 terabyte and 16 gigs, you're already looking at like $1,900 for this machine. At that point, just get the 14-inch Pro, because that laptop is on another level of performance. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely awesome to see the jump from M1 to M2, and that's going to enable a ton more great stuff for the most popular laptop for the everyday baseline users. But if you zoom out, there's still a big difference in performance when moving up to the higher end chips, M1 Pro and then M1 Max. The amount of additional performance you get for the extra $200 to $300 is massive. If that's what you really want, that's what you should get. Plus, you get a much better, brighter mini LED high refresh rate screen too, and the webcam and the notch is way better, much better speakers, and you actually get some ports while you're at it. So I don't know. You shouldn't get a literal worse version of all of those things. I mean, $200 to $300 isn't nothing.
But you're already spending $1,700. So yeah, I'm curious to see what he's going to say right there. But you're already spending $1,700. So what's another $200 to $300? You know, I mean, because if you're in that mindset, which there are people, you need to go find yourself a different computer. Like at that point, it's just you will get whatever you get for whatever you pay, and yeah, you'll deal with it. But after spending $1,700 now, you're like, well, I know for an additional $200 to $300 I get way more stuff, but $1,700 that's really my limit. I think you should probably reevaluate some stuff.
It's not zero, but I don't know, really squeezes this new MacBook Pro quite a bit. And plus, you can't get around the fact that it's literally worse at all those things. I think you're forgetting something. Oh, really? The MacBook Pro has studio quality microphones, while the MacBook Air does not.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and say this again. Curious as to what he's going to say, but I'll be on the side of the PC MacBook manufacturing. Microphones, speakers, webcams. If a user is really concerned or interested in any of those items, they're going to go out and buy their own third-party version of that. You're going to go buy a microphone you can plug in, a webcam you can plug in, some speakers you can plug in. So when anybody criticizes the quality of any of those, especially on laptops, I'm like, look, dude, if you're that serious about whatever it is you're attempting to do with those items, you're going to go out and buy one that's like a dedicated whatever one of those things. So studio quality mics, cool, I guess. But if you need a real microphone, you're going to go buy one.
I mean, so technically, they both are listed as having triple microphone arrays with beamforming. It's just Apple chose to call the one in the MacBook Pro studio quality. It might have a slight difference, but really, are you going to pay extra for that and then sacrifice all this other stuff? Okay, I think there is one redeeming factor. And what is that? Battery.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know what his point's going to be yet. And I'll be honest. Yes, battery life is important. It really is. Like, that's one of the privileges of a laptop. You want to be able to be portable with it. But the battery life that we get out of a lot of, not all, but a lot of modern day machines is pretty good. I'm sure he's going to quote whatever he got out of his 14 inchers and then, what these 13 inchers and, what they're rated. But I think we sometimes set these unrealistic expectations. And then we also hear these unrealistic scenarios when Apple or other companies benchmark their batteries and say, oh, well, you get 18 or 20 hours of battery life doing this one specific task. And you're like, well, that's not relevant to what I do at all. So thanks for the information. And I guess at that point, the only way we can gauge them is saying, okay, well, even though I am not watching 20 straight hours of TV in the Apple TV app with the brightness turned down and all the radios turned off, but if I were, I would get 20 hours of that in the MacBook Pro, and I might only get 18 or 17 hours of doing that exact same task in the MacBook Air, then yeah, great. Battery life is better. Okay. But I guess the point I'm trying to get at is, yes, battery life is important. It's come a long way in the years that laptops have existed. And if it gets to the point where, and I'll be curious to hear whatever numbers you're going to quote, if it gets to the point where it's like it's that big of a deal for you to want to go down to the 13-incher MacBook Pro and then not go down even further to the either of the MacBook Airs. You just need to make sure you are around a power outlet all the time, or more. They need to be more readily available to you, or you need to carry a battery bank with you because yeah, and I think that's where I would stop. Yeah, hey, find a way to be near power more frequently because it sounds like you need it.
MacBook Pro has surprisingly excellent battery life, better than I think pretty much all of us expected. We saw the 20 hours of video playback quoted on stage, but in real world use, this might be the best battery life in any modern laptop we've ever seen. There's people out here getting 16 to 20 hours of actual real world use. The Verge's laptop reviewer Monica wrote a hilarious piece about how long it took her to run down a battery, and across the board, it's a tremendously long performer. So if you want the best battery in any laptop, get this one. Okay, so that is awesome to see.
I really wish you would have mentioned what the battery life was of those 14 of the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I'm not going to look it up. You can look it up.
At the same time, those other laptops already have great battery life too. So you're not trying to spend just to get a slightly better battery and then sacrifice all those other things we talked about. It's really quite a small difference. So the ideal customer for this new MacBook Pro
doesn't exist. And I actually have a friend who will rename nameless, but this one friend, like many other people probably, are excited about that Pro moniker of, oh, it's the MacBook Pro, so it must be better. And it's like, well, it's not really, and you miss out on a lot of stuff if you don't upgrade to the 14-inch. But it's not a MacBook Air though; it's a MacBook Pro, right? Yeah, it is, but it's still not the arguably best choice you could make in terms of a purchase, but that doesn't matter because it's a MacBook Pro, right? Yes. Here you go. Here's your computer. This is the one that you want. Okay. You don't really care. You're not a real professional. You don't need this truly for professional grade stuff. You're a professional consumer. Yeah, like most of us. And that's perfectly fine. But just know that you are not a professional. So that's who this one is for.
Is somebody who just needs a slightly better sustained performance than the new MacBook Air and is willing to sacrifice screen size, webcam, speakers, ports, thickness, and weight to get it.
Wait a minute. Did he just support? Oh, no. Okay. I see what he was saying. But yeah, so he was kind of saying, yeah, you're going to get rid of all those things and you get a slightly better, slightly longer sustained performance. And at this point, I ask really a lot of people because desktops aren't nearly, I don't know, popularity level. It's not going to make it up, but laptops are extremely popular. We all can agree upon that. But for these people, I'm like, well, how portable do you actually need to be? Can you get a desktop? And I'm sure the answer is, well, I'd like to move around. Okay, then cool. But for some people, just get a Mac Mini then. Like that will probably solve your problems too. Just get a Mac Mini. And you'll save a lot of money compared to the cost of some of these machines.
Or someone who is literally about to buy the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro. Enterprise. Yep, Enterprise, that's it.
See? Good, yep, there you go. Businesses. Oh yeah, wait, what's on sale now? Oh, these guys, cool. That was a really good ending right there. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about the Enterprise. I will say, and definitely not education. I mean, if you have education buying these M1 or M2 MacBook Pros, I don't know, should probably find some other ways to spend their money. But good, definitely good on him talking about that. And I'm sure Apple, I know they have all of that information. So if this is a business targeted machine, then kudos to them. Because as I'm sitting here thinking, looking at my ThinkPad, these, as far as I'm concerned, are, business level machines. They're pretty sturdy, pretty durable. But one thing about them is that a lot of them look the same. The design has not changed much over the past couple years. I don't know exactly how many, but I have a ThinkPad X1 Carbon 6th generation, and I'm pretty sure the 5th generation before it looked almost identical. And as we've gone up to the 9th generation now, they've made subtle changes in terms of the overall build of it, but in terms of the actual appearance, it's kind of the same computer. So yeah, targeted at businesses, you don't need to be super flashy. You don't need to change it up too frequently. And yeah, maybe he's right. Uh, that machine might be for businesses. All right. Appreciate it if you got this far. As I said at the beginning, and even as T said and other people have said, as a consumer, you probably should not buy this machine. If you're looking at to buy stuff for your company, why not?